Hi, I'm Tina. I started this channel in March this year to keep me motivated with my reading and to document my reading and reselling journey. In my first video, I set myself a target to read 50 books this year. Last year, I read 44 books, up from 31 the year before and 34 the year before that. In 37 in 2020 and about 22 on average in the years prior to that. At the start of the channel, I had a profit of £43.75 and 375 books to read. So to round off the year, I'm going to run through the books that I've read this year and then look at where I'm at. January saw me finishing a 6-book set, the Jackson Lamb or Slough House series by Mick Herron, now an Apple Plus TV show called Slow Horses. The 6th book, called Joe Country, had less of the dry humour I'd come to love in the previous books, and the plot was also less convincing. But I really enjoyed spending time with these misfits, and I like an author who is not afraid to kill off a few characters. I'm keeping my eyes open for more of these books, and definitely want to watch the TV adaptation.
I don't normally do these kind of speeches, but this feels like a big moment. And I've got to be honest, working with you has been the lowest point in a disappointing career. Right.
Sticking with TV shows, I next read the 3 Dark Angel books. I did a review of these, so you can check out that video if you're interested in them. After those, I felt like something light and easy to read, so I read some children's books. I read the Maths Inspectors, books 1 and 2, and the Puzzled series, 1 to 3. The Math Inspector books were fun little adventures and mysteries with some maths problems thrown in. It was like the famous 5 brought up to date with a splash of Scooby-Doo. The Puzzled series were nice stories with some interesting puzzles. The characters were well written and there were good lessons in teamwork, determination and thinking things through. There were less opportunities to solve the puzzles for yourself as the books progressed though, which I felt let them down a little bit. I read a lot of Dr. Seuss books this year as well, probably about 24 in all, as I bought them to resell and thought I would catch up on the ones I never saw when I was a kid. I did a fun little review on some of these, and my favourites were The Sneetches and Other Stories. I think I'll just count those as one book as far as my challenge goes though. Getting back to some more grown-up books, well, young adult at least, was the Shatter Me series. I loved these and I did a spoiler-free review of them. They were a dystopian superhero coming-of-age story with some romance, great characters and some very insightful moments. Thoroughly enjoyed these. The Savages and the American Savages by Matt Wyman were dark comedies with good characters who were all likeable despite their appetites. They were cannibals. The first book was let down by its editing and proofreading, but that improved in the sequel. I enjoyed the story overall, with touching family moments, an insight into teenage relationships, and funny comments regarding eating habits. I had Gru from Despicable Me in my head for Titus the Father. These were a refreshing change for children's books.
Good soup. I love the combination of gummy bears with meat.
I love cats and I really enjoyed these silly little children's books about them. The Kitten Hunt series, Kitten Hunt, Kitten Wars and Kitten Catastrophe by Anna Wilson were fun little reads, cute stories, great characters, especially Obadiah, the cat. They concerned families, friendship, pet sitting and a talking cat. Who wouldn't want one of those? The third book looked at different types of bullying in a very clever way. And overall they were a fun little read and very enjoyable. Toto the Ninja Cat and the Great Snake Escape was a funny little book about the nightlife of London with cats, rats, snakes and other animals. It felt a little bit stilted in places, but the characters were fun, the story was entertaining and fast-paced, aimed at younger readers. But still, I enjoyed it. The second book in the Toto the Ninja Cat series was The Incredible Cheese Heist. This was another silly tale of talking cats, dogs and rats. Nice characters and a funny story, but the writing was a bit stilted in places. But I'm sure the intended audience of young children would find it extremely enjoyable. Next, I read The Sinclair's Mysteries by Catherine Woodfine. I did a review of these 4 great books, but to summarise, they were great adventure crime mysteries set in an Edwardian London department store. Whilst sorting through some old books to take back to the charity shop, we found the Usborne Guide to the Supernatural World of Vampires, Ghosts and Mysterious Powers by Eric Maple. This very old book that was my husband's when he was a kid was written with very abrupt sentences, probably because it's trying to cover a lot of topics and stories in a small space. But it's a good starting point to whet the appetite for the supernatural, with lots of suggestions for further reading in its short snippets of information. I read many other similar books as a child that were presented with better artwork and story flow, because this one seemed quite dry, like it was trying to be more of an encyclopedia. A book to dip into rather than read from cover to cover, but I did read it from cover to cover and I enjoyed it. After all of these children's books, I felt like something a bit more adult, so I selected The Game Trilogy by Anders de la Motte. I read the English translation, which only had a few errors. I did a review of these actually. Overall, I liked the premise of these books. I thought it was really fun and interesting. I didn't like any of the characters. I thought they were horrible and I wanted them to get their comeuppance at the end. You'll have to read the books to see if they did. They definitely fitted the bill for adult books though, as they contained graphic scenes of sex, violence and other nefarious goings-on, but an interesting thriller nonetheless. Keeping with the thriller theme, I listened to the Miss Marple's Complete Short Stories gift set. Most of the stories were nicely narrated by Joan Hickson, the lovely lady who did the UK TV series. They were good, easy listening, some great detective work by the lovely Miss Marple. Oh, well, I'm sure I wouldn't know, dear. I just think that living in a small village like St Mary's Meads, you get to see a lot of life, condensed as it were. That's the kind of thing she says a lot. Very self-effacing, but a great judge of character and always right. Fun. I enjoyed these. The next paper books that I read were the Dark Matter trilogy by Terry Terry, Contagion, Deception and Evolution. I really enjoyed these and I reviewed these as well. They were a great concept combining quantum physics with microbiology. And to think that it was written before COVID, yet was pretty close to what happened when an outbreak did occur, although the consequences in these novels was much more severe. I did guess the source of the outbreak early on, but that only enhanced my enjoyment of the books. The characters were really well written and believable. They all had their own hopes and dreams that flowed together well. I came into the books cold with no idea what they were about, and I was soon totally gripped by the story, which was nicely paced, hard to put down. And yeah, I whizzed through these and really, really liked them. Then I listened to the audio version of Elidor by Alan Garner. The version I picked up on CD was read by Jonathan Keeble. Now, although Elidor is one of my all-time favourite books from when I was a kid, 5-star all the way, the story obviously as good as I remembered, the narration of this audiobook was awful. He used silly voices for the kids that seemed really condescending and made it lose all of the magic. So I really don't recommend this audio version. Read the original instead. Even if the setting is slightly outdated, the story is still great and really fires the imagination. For my holiday read, I took a really battered copy of The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is book 1 of the Farseer trilogy, and the first book I've ever read by Robin Hobb. Although I'm really into fantasy, somehow these ones had passed me by. But I really, really enjoyed this high fantasy tale. The characters were well developed and really grew on me. The world building was lovely. It felt like a real place, alive with real people. I enjoyed the main character's story arc, learning about the world and society along with him. He did seem a little dense at times, but maybe that was the author's intention to make the reader feel clever. He grew from a boy to a very interesting young man, and I'm intrigued to see where his life takes him. It reminded me how much I love my fantasy. After our short break in North Wales, walking the coastal path and reading fantasy, we got back and I decided to try and clear out some of the children's books that I've got on my shelves, have an easy read and clear some space. So I read the Place Called Perfect trilogy by Helena Duggan. I did a quick review of these recently. Fast-paced children's books, the two main characters were likeable, not massively fleshed out or developed, and the story was a bit silly, but the underlying message was a good one. We should all embrace our differences. You may remember that I found the Lady Cottington's pressed fairy book in one of my hauls. This is so funny. It's just fabulous drawings of squashed fairies with an amusing, silly sort of diary story of the lady who squashed them.
To catch a fairy, one simply sat with one's book open and waited for the fairy to alight upon the page and...
Unfortunately, my copy obtained from the charity shop was missing the last 20 pages, so I don't know the ending. I think this was because there were some naughty, rude fairies at the back of the book, or even ruder than the ones in the rest of the book. And I do wonder if they were removed because someone wanted to keep them, or if they were just offended by them and thought they weren't suitable to go to charity. Anyway, I had fun with the book. I enjoyed reading it, and it came with a short DVD that had a skit by Terry Jones, and that was really funny as well. So, just a half-hour flick through the book and quick read of the little story. Very amusing. I also got a lovely little poetry book, Where My Wellies Take Me, written by Michael Morpurgo and Claire Morpurgo. Well, I say written by, I think they basically just compiled the poems and did a little story following the adventures of an 8-year-old girl as she walks around the countryside exploring nature. The poem selection was okay, but I could think of better ones that would have suited the book as well. Yet it was beautifully illustrated, and it did capture the feelings of a childhood walk and took me back to my own childhood rambles. So I enjoyed this one, and I passed it on to my aunt, who thoroughly enjoyed it as well. Then, when I looked at my shelves and saw how much space this series was taking up, I decided to read them next. A series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, all 13 books, which I have also reviewed. And these were great children's books, a fairly dark comedy. Overall, I really like them, and I can see why people rave about them if they read them as a child. I think reading them as an adult, you can appreciate them, but maybe not become as obsessed of them as you would if you read them as a kid. In amongst the Lemony Snicket books, I read The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. Oh my God, this was such an amazing book. 5-star, 10-star. Very difficult to review though, without spoilers. I absolutely loved it. The characters were so well written you felt like you'd actually met them in person. But it was the story and the spaces, the feelings, the ideas and the concepts behind the words that blew me away. Will definitely be rereading this one and keeping it on my shelf, and chuffed to bits that I've actually got a signed copy. I listened to The Complete Ripley Radio Mysteries by Patricia Highsmith and Stephen Wyatt. The audio dramatisation was well done and the stories were good and an easy listen. It was an abridged version. It was a thriller mystery from the perspective of the killer. He's not likeable. I think he was trying to be portrayed as charming, but I didn't feel it. It was intriguing enough, but I don't think I'll be rushing out to read any more of these. Maybe these type of thrillers just aren't my thing. I then decided I wanted a bit more fantasy in my life, so I went back to the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb and read the second one, The Royal Assassin. It followed on directly from the first book in the trilogy. I loved the magic system, the world building and the characters. The main character's really likeable, and his relationship with Night Eyes the Wolf was amazing. I want that in my life. The Fool was also a fascinating character that I really warmed to. And although the book was quite dark with some terrible goings-on, I was left feeling weirdly uplifted, and I'm looking forward to reading the final instalment in this trilogy over the Christmas break. I listened to the book To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee and enjoyed Sissy Spacek's narration. I can understand why the book has won so many awards. It shows a slice of life in the deep south of America in the 1930s, told from the perspective of a young white girl, the author I presume, whose father is a lawyer. As well as showing life in those times, it accurately depicts the racial tensions and prejudices that existed. The father defends a black man accused of raping a white woman, and it's obvious from the start that he is innocent but will be found guilty. What wasn't so obvious was the fallout from it, and the ending was a surprise. Not my usual type of book, and if I'd been reading the paper version, I probably would have abandoned it. But the audio version kept me interested whilst I was doing other things, and I was pleased to complete it. I think history should be remembered as a lesson for our future. I also listened to The Rottweiler by Ruth Rendell. This audiobook was narrated by Jan Francis. It was an abridged version, but actually I was quite pleased that it was, because whilst the narration was good, the story was only okay. It was a tale of a serial murderer told from the perspective of those around him and himself once he was revealed. The cast of characters were quite a weird bunch, and their lives weren't massively interesting, but it was an easy listen. But I don't think I'd really bother with the book or anything else from this author. It's kind of put me off for a little bit, to be honest. I picked up a lovely Brambley Hedge set by Jill Barklam for a nostalgia read. I have fond memories of reading these with my mother, who made the cute Brambley hedge mice out of fabric to sell at school fairs. I have read the first two, Spring and Summer, and will be reading the others when I'm in the mood before I sell them on. Cute little mice in the countryside. So keeping with my theme of making space on my shelves, I finished off Darren Shan's Demonata. I'd read the first 4 books last year, Lord Loss, Demon Thief, Slaughter and Beck, and so I had the 6 to finish this year, which I did. Although I think they're supposed to be children's books, they're quite gory, so if you're thinking of getting them for your kids, you might want to have a flick through them yourself first before you decide whether to get them to start reading them. But I would have thought older teenagers would be fine and would really love them. Suffice to say, they're a great series. Horror, demons, werewolves and magic, and really enjoyed them. Watch out for my review. Then I listened to the unabridged audiobook of Sanctus by Simon Toyne, read expertly by Jonathan Keeble. He did a much better job on this than he did on Elidor. I really enjoyed this religious mystery thriller. I think I might have struggled reading the physical book, but the fantastic narration carried the story along. It was a hint of the Da Vinci Code with a 39 Steps vibe. I liked the main characters and thought the misguided protagonists were well developed. Whilst the story was nicely tied up, it definitely left room for another book to follow, and I believe there's actually a trilogy. I liked the interpretation of a warped religious sect and found it chillingly believable, and I was left with a bitter feeling that most men are evil, especially those in positions of power throughout history, stepping on and using women to fulfil their goals. Then I read the Elizabeth Spymaster series in order to gift them to my aunt as an extra Christmas present. The first book, The Tudor Secret, was set in England at the time of turmoil when King Edward VI died and Lady Jane Grey was queen for 9 days before Mary took her place. This fictional tale follows the exploits of a foundling in service to the Dudley family. He evolves from a mere stable boy to a squire and gets caught up in the intrigues of the royal court. Interweaved with real history, his story is compelling and believable, and is a very likeable character. Although I did think some of the explanation at the very end of the book was a bit drawn out. Overall, the pacing was pretty good. The second book, The Tudor Conspiracy, follows on from book 1. Mary I is now on the throne and suspicious of everyone. Our hero Brandon is once again caught up in the affairs of court, trying to please both Mary and her half-sister Elizabeth, helping to maintain the Tudor reign whilst avoiding his own demise. Cleverly written with the made-up character entwining well into actual historical events, this book was a real page-turner. I was shocked and saddened by the death of a supporting character, but it played into the story well. There was only one section of the book that I did not think necessary, and it seemed very out of character, but it played into the longer story, so I can deal with it. Moving on to the third book, The Tudor Vendetta. This was set about 6 years after the previous book. Elizabeth I is now taking her throne. The book dealt less with actual history than the earlier books, and read more like a mystery thriller. The setting and descriptions of the period were still fantastic, but the main plot element seemed a little far-fetched. It was a quick, easy read. I liked the main character and was pleased with his ending. Overall, I really enjoyed these historic fiction books, and hopefully my aunt will enjoy them too. To finish off the year, I'm currently reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the prequel to The Hunger Games, and so far I'm thoroughly enjoying it and hope to have it finished before Christmas. And I hope to read the final book of the Farseer trilogy, The Assassin's Quest, over the holidays. So that's it for this year. I read a total of about 70 books, so my goal for next year is going to be 75, as I've quite a few children's and young adults books to read. I enjoyed the variety of books that I read this year, and that's the great thing about sourcing books from charity shops and car boot sales. You never know what you're going to find, and you pick up books that you might never have thought of reading otherwise. My next video will be a bit of a bookcase tour as I look through my massive TBR and try to decide what to read next year. Although I do like to keep it fairly fluid depending on my mood. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content, as it will encourage me to keep making videos next year. Let me know in the comments what you'll be reading over the festive period, and I hope you all have a great time. Right, I'm off to read a book.